Welcome everyone to ABARES Outlook for 2022. And it's just the second year in our virtual conference room. We're all suitably attired, neat business dress from the waist up and tracky pants and slippers down below. Depending on where you are, of course, it may be gumboots. Now, this is the 52nd National Outlook Conference hosted by ABARES. Just over 2,000 people have registered. So the virtual event is proving very successful as a way for people who might not always be able to make the trip to Canberra. And we're thinking of those people caught up in the flooding emergency right now. So although we are virtual, we are meeting on the lands, the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people. And I acknowledge and respect the traditional custodians of the land and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and the region. I extend that recognition to the traditional custodians of all other lands on which we are gathered today and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples attending this event. So for our welcome to country, it's a big hello to Ngunnawal Elder Violet Sheridan.
Human, and I, it's a pleasure to be here this morning to perform a welcome to country for ABARES for their up-and-coming conference. I believe a welcome to country is a traditional Aboriginal blessing, symbolising the traditional owners of the land giving consent for an event to take place on the land, and it also shows respect for the First Peoples of the land you are meeting on. The reason for this custom is to protect your spirit while you are here. I'm a proud Ngunnawal woman as I walk into the future, teaching the next generations about the oldest culture in the world, the Aboriginal culture. I'd like to pay my respects to my elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect if there's any other Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'd also like to acknowledge all the non-Indigenous people here today as well. In keeping the general spirit of friendship and reconciliation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning on behalf of my people, the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal people. And on behalf of my family and the other Ngunnawal families, keep safe, God bless. Thank you.
Violet Sheridan, thank you so much. And now to open Outlook 2022, it's my pleasure to welcome the Federal Agriculture Minister and Minister for Northern Australia, David Littleproud.
Well, welcome to this year's ABARES conference, albeit in a virtual sense. Tragically, we've been unable to come together as we normally do in Canberra to celebrate all that is agriculture, to look and understand where we've come from, but where we're also going. This year has been a big year for Australian agriculture. Finally, the seasons have been with us and Australian agriculture has blossomed as a result. For the first time, over $60 billion worth of agricultural production, in fact $68 billion is predicted, and next year we're predicting for the first time to go above $70 billion worth of agricultural production. That's an enormous effort in the face of some of the biggest challenges Australian agriculture has faced, not just in a seasonal sense, but also because of COVID-19. Our Australian farmers have simply got on with the job and continue to produce the best food and fibre in the world. But we continue to face up to not only those challenges, but also the challenges that keep me awake at night, whether it be biosecurity and particularly the evolving threats that we're seeing as an agricultural sector. As these threats start to evolve and move across the globe, from across Africa, across Asia and now into Southeast Asia and right on our doorstep, many of these threats are new and evolving. And so we have to change our approach to addressing them and to mitigating them. And that's why I'm proud to say over the last two budgets, the federal government has put over $1.1 billion worth of measures to address biosecurity. This is not only about looking at what we have done, but how do we evolve our response in keeping these threats out, but also responding if they get here. And addressing biosecurity comes down to two key elements in my mind: intelligence and technology. We're investing in the intelligence of understanding, particularly where many of our containers are coming from. We're going to go from around 5 million containers to about 8.5 million containers by the end of the decade. So the capacity and constraints that we're going to have at our shipping ports is going to be real, but so too are the threats. So how do we understand where those containers have come from so that we can deploy our resources efficiently and effectively to where our biggest threats are? And so the federal government put over $14 million in being able to gain the information to understand where containers have been over their life, going back 3-4 years, so that we'll know whether a container has been sitting in Africa 2 years ago, but may have come from Italy where there may be no threat, but understanding 2 years ago it was sitting in a paddock in Africa means that it is a real and present danger to Australian agriculture. We will therefore deploy resources. So that intelligence is driving the deployment of resources in an efficient and effective way. We're also working with many of our import partners to make sure that not only around accreditation of approved arrangements, but also working with them and reaching in to much of the way in which they order their goods from around the world, so that we are being preemptive and understanding where they're ordering much of their supplies from what part of the world, so that we work collaboratively with them and that we are entrenched in their ordering system so that we're part of that biosecurity system. We're also working in terms of our passengers, not just in making sure there's more boots and dogs and scientists on the ground, but also new 3D X-ray technology that we're deploying in our postal services. All 144 million parcels will now go through a 3D X-ray scanner and artificial intelligence that we've created here in Australia. They'll be able to pick up organic matter, pick up plant matter, pick up even live animals, so that we will be able to detect these at the source as they come into Australia. And we've got a world first with this 3D X-ray technology. We're about to start trials with New Zealand, so that every bag that comes out of Auckland Airport, we will be able to know what's in that bag before they take off and before they land in Australia, and then complement that with our electronic declaration system. And if they haven't declared, we will know before they land whether they have declared any organic matter in their bag, and if they haven't, then our officers will know directly where to go, which bag and which passenger to pull out. And to complement that, we're increasing the fines, lifting it from $444 to $2,664. So there's real meaning at the borders, so that people learn that if they flout our biosecurity laws, then there is a penalty. And then we've extended that also to the cancellation of visas. I'm proud to say our biosecurity officers, those men and women at the front line, have also cancelled 14 visas of people who have tried to come to this country and flagrantly and blatantly tried to get around our biosecurity laws. We have cancelled their visas. They are not welcome back for up to 3 years, and we will continue to cancel visas of those foreign citizens that come to this country and do the wrong thing. So we're equipping our people with the technology and the science, but also the law enforcement to be able to send a real message around biosecurity. But it's also about making sure we continue not only to protect brand Australia through our biosecurity laws, but also our stewardship. And I'm pleased to say that a world first that we've created as a government, the Biodiversity Stewardship Program, will reward farmers, not for the blunt instrument of just carbon farming, but we are the first country in the world to be able to measure an improvement in biodiversity. Our farmers will now be able to be rewarded not just for carbon, but through a voluntary market on biodiversity. The first in the world to be able to do this. And many of our trading partners are looking to us, looking to the science that we've created here in Australia to adopt for themselves. But because we have led the world on this, we are world leading, it means that we are much setting the rules around the world with respect to sustainability in markets of agricultural food and fibre. Australia leads the way. We're also developing a brand that our farmers will be able to put on their beef, on their sheep, on their wool, that they export around the world, that'll have a biodiversity seal, internationally recognised, that'll get them a premium. So this is a world first in making sure we have a sophisticated carbon farming model that has a halo credit for biodiversity and allows our farmers also to get a premium in the marketplace. Nowhere else in the world has been able to do that. But we're also putting safeguards around protecting productive agricultural land so that passive investors don't come in and take away agricultural production land and tie it up and take a passive income stream and reduce our productive capacity. We're putting a trigger in place where I have the right of veto for these projects that may go beyond 33% of a property. That doesn't mean they can't go beyond 33% of a property, but it just means that they have to continue to produce agricultural production. They have to be able to prove that this ERF project and the biodiversity payments that they'll get will support those regional communities that are supporting them. So these are the exciting measures that we're also taking around making sure that we grow that sustainability. Also finishing off our innovation systems, a real reform with respect to our innovation with our research development corporations, making sure that we have hubs, a digital platform, world first in terms of where our reforms have led the next generation of young people to be able to come into agriculture. We are at a sweet spot in agriculture because of the seasons, our commodity prices, but now is the time to make the reforms, to make the changes that grows Australian agriculture well beyond 70 odd billion towards that $100 billion goal that you've set yourself. Thank you for all your hard work. You're part of an industry you should be very proud of, the Australian government is very proud of, and on behalf of a grateful nation, can I simply say thank you.
Minister Littleproud, thank you very much. And you've helped us set the scene for the Outlook theme for the year is growing agriculture through innovation and sustainability. Now, this session will set the scene for the economic drivers and the trends that will shape the year ahead, and we hope it sparks a good discussion. We'll have short presentations followed by our live Q&A sessions, so you can submit and upvote questions during the presentation via the menu on the left of your conference screen. Mathias Cormann has a presentation only. He's not joining the Q&A. Slides from the session are available in the resources tab for you to download, and our sessions will be recorded and available under the catch-up tab after 24 hours. So let's get the broad global picture of trade, these shifting times and agriculture with a presentation by Mathias Cormann, the Secretary General of OECD, who prior to his appointment was Australia's Minister for Finance, the leader of the government in the Senate. Mathias Cormann.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished guests. Thank you for inviting me to join the Australian Bureau of Agriculture and Resource Economics and Sciences annual conference on growing agriculture through innovation and sustainability. I'm pleased to provide the OECD's perspectives on agriculture and international trade. This week's conference is a timely opportunity to reflect on the triple challenge facing food systems across the globe. To ensure food security and nutrition for a growing world population, 2 billion people do not have regular access to sufficient and nutritious food. To provide incomes and livelihoods for the hundreds of millions of people working along the food chain, and to ensure the sustainability of the sector. Food systems account for between 21% and 37% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. In agriculture, irrigation accounts for 70% of water used worldwide and over 40% in many OECD countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has underscored the need to move from business as usual to more forward-looking policies for resilient, sustainable and productive food systems. The OECD is working across 3 work streams to support this transition. First, we're working to facilitate global trade in agro-products to support the delivery of affordable and plentiful foods while supporting farmers' incomes and avoiding waste. As I'm sure you have all heard at Outlook already, in the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, agricultural supply chains proved extraordinarily resilient as governments reacted promptly to minimize disruptions. Around 800 measures were implemented by 54 developed and emerging countries to keep food supplies flowing. But today, some food supply chains are under pressure. Many farmers are struggling to secure sufficient fertilizer inputs, and when they can be sourced, the costs are at record highs. The tragic situation unfolding in Ukraine has added significant geopolitical instability to this mix. Combined with high freight costs and strong demand, prices for key food staples are close to record highs. Edible oil prices, for example, have more than doubled in the past 2 years. It is critically important then to maintain transparency on policies and food supplies to avoid policy settings that would intensify supply pressures. This is why the Agricultural Market Information System and its Market Monitor, which is maintained by the OECD and other international organizations, is so important. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, it has served as a crucial knowledge-sharing platform for governments and helped to limit the application of export restrictions by providing increased transparency on policy settings. The OECD will continue to work through the Agricultural Market Information System, our committees, and our monitoring work to help steady global agricultural markets. We're also identifying the best ways to help facilitate trade of perishable agro products by simplifying trade regulations and border procedures. Our work has shown that improved transparency, predictability, and automation of border controls could increase trade in agro-foods by up to 5%. This includes moving to e-certificates for trade. Second, we are leading efforts to rethink the way agriculture is subsidized and supported. The OECD provides the only country-comparable tracking of government support to agriculture. And we have shown that this support reached a massive $720 billion US per year between 2018 and 2020. This is a big number and higher than fossil fuel and industrial subsidies. Much of it distorts markets, and much of it is spent in ways that do not foster sustainable productivity, including by driving higher carbon emissions, land and water degradation, and biodiversity loss. In the 54 countries monitored by the OECD, nearly 2/3 of agricultural subsidies are provided by the most distorting instruments, market price support, and payments linked to outputs. Such measures are inefficient in transferring income to farmers, as they tend to disproportionately benefit those with the largest landholdings. And they also exacerbate environmental problems in the agricultural sector. The OECD is working to help identify and encourage the phase-out of market-distorting support and direct spending instead in favor of investments in public goods that boost productivity growth and help strengthen agricultural resilience. In Australia, such investments account for almost half of budget support to agriculture. But globally, only $1 in $6 of support to agriculture is allocated to innovation, biosecurity, and infrastructure. As Australia's experience demonstrates, investments in public goods are most effective when they involve public-private partnerships and put co-financing at the heart of rural innovation. This is precisely the raison d'être of the Australian Rural Research and Development Corporation, corporations, which have been the cornerstone of agricultural innovation in Australia for over 3 decades. They have spearheaded work to introduce new systems of traceability and quality assurance for Australian pork export and research to develop new rice varieties more capable of handling variations in temperature, to name but a few. Investing in sustainable innovation will become a growing competitive advantage, with consumers increasingly demanding sustainable agro products. Australia is well placed to make sustainability part of its competitive advantage if the right incentives are in place. Recent policies of the Future Drought Fund and the Agricultural Innovation Agenda, which encompass innovation generation and adoption, are important steps in this direction. Third, we are supporting multilateral efforts to improve agricultural policies. Our work on agricultural subsidies, for example, is informing World Trade Organization negotiations ahead of its 12th ministerial meeting by holding up a mirror to governments, showcasing market-distorting practices and possible alternatives. Multilateral solutions can take time, but they are the only viable way to make agricultural markets fairer and more competitive. Our OECD Agriculture Ministers meeting on the 3rd and 4th of November this year will foster global dialogue on how we can build forward-looking agriculture policies that work from plate to planet. As a large agriculture exporter, indeed as the world's 7th largest exporter of animal-based products, we are counting on Australian insights and leadership. The OECD is also working hard to build on the momentum of COP26 to help ensure the world remains on the path to global net zero by 2050. In practice, climate mitigation policies including those affecting the agricultural sector, face resistance due to costs and competitiveness concerns. This is why we're developing a new initiative to replicate the successful OECD G20 inclusive framework approach for international taxation, to apply that to the international mitigation effort when it comes to climate change. We need to ensure more ambitious action on climate change in a way that is globally effective and fair. Effective in that efforts in individual jurisdictions help to actually reduce global emissions rather than just shift them from one part into other parts of the world, and fair in that every country carries an appropriate, proportionate and verifiable share of the burden. Our challenge then is to ensure the level of ambition and effort in individual jurisdictions on climate can be lifted to the level required to reach global net zero by 2050, while maintaining to the greatest extent possible a global level playing field, avoiding counterproductive trade distortions, carbon leakage, and ultimately trade tensions. Our proposal is to assess and report on comparative effort, cost, and impact achieved through various policy approaches to reduce emissions, to help inform better decisions and achieve over time a globally more coherent, better coordinated approach. In doing so, we recognize the diversity of circumstances and policy approaches around the world to address climate change. If the international community comes to a common understanding on carbon mitigation approaches, concerns regarding carbon leakage can be addressed without leading to counterproductive trade frictions. Colleagues, agriculture is a critically important part of the solution to some of the most complex global challenges. If governed effectively, food systems will be able to meet the triple challenge of food security, livelihoods, and sustainability. By bringing together public, private, and third sector experts, this Outlook conference is very well placed to help government and to help industry develop solution-oriented, future forward-looking agricultural policies. You can count on the OECD to continue to support your efforts as we strive to make global agriculture and food systems fit for the future. Thank you.
Mathias Cormann, thank you very much. Now, unfortunately, he won't be able to join the Q&A, but if I can pick up on his points there, the OECD is working to reduce agricultural subsidies globally, and given subsidies create less sustainable production. And I heard Mathias Cormann's vote of confidence for the rural research and development corporations, the public-private funding model for their research on sustainable agricultural innovation. So let's hear from our large private Australian investor in renewable energy. And just over the weekend, work began on construction on a green hydrogen manufacturing facility at Gladstone, Queensland, by Fortescue Future Industries. So it's tremendous to have the CEO of Fortescue Future Industries, Julie Shuttleworth, with us. With a long and significant career in the mining and resources industry in Australia and around the world, Ms. Shuttleworth was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia in 2021. Ms. Shuttleworth will address how Fortescue is leading the green industrial revolution.
It's great to be joining you at this year's conference, and particularly noting the theme of growing agriculture through innovation and sustainability. I grew up in regional Western Australia, and I understand the joys and pressures of living on the land. I've personally experienced the agony of severe weather events when bushfires tore through our property at Gidgegunnup last year. We were the lucky ones. Our sprinkler system saved our house and sheds, but more than 80 other houses, including our neighbours, were destroyed. Living on the land means we are no stranger to extreme weather events spurred on by climate change. We know how high the stakes are and that we must act now if we are going to stop the planet from cooking. We need to work together to seek innovative and sustainable solutions to the challenges facing our industries as the world races to reach net zero. And while there are many challenges ahead of us, there are also huge opportunities. And this is why Fortescue Metals Group is transforming from a pure-play iron ore mining company to a vertically integrated green energy and resources company. Innovation, stretch targets, and never ever giving up are three things we pride ourselves on at Fortescue. It's how we've built the company from humble beginnings to one of the top ASX 20 companies it is now in less than 20 years. Decarbonisation is a journey that we share with the agricultural sector, and I look forward to telling you how Fortescue is planning to do it. The key is to get started. Fortescue's initial cost of production for iron ore was over $50 per tonne, and within 10 years it was less than 15. Achieved by getting projects started, learning, getting the flywheel turning, scale, technology, innovation. Down came the costs. We were the first to operate Caterpillar heavy haul mining trucks autonomously, without drivers, at commercial scale. And we operate the fastest heavy haul railway in the world. Fortescue set stretch targets, and while there were setbacks, we kept moving forward. We are going to do that again. This time our goal is to make zero emissions energy available at a global scale, and we will decarbonise our mining operations by 2030 using renewable electricity, green hydrogen and green ammonia. We also believe the Australian agricultural industry can achieve net zero and turn the climate change challenge into an economic opportunity. So what is green hydrogen? Green hydrogen is a zero carbon fuel which is made using renewable electricity. Produced by a process called electrolysis, which uses electricity to break water into its components, hydrogen and oxygen. Green hydrogen is a clean fuel which allows renewable energy to be stored for long periods and transported over long distances. When used as a fuel, the only byproduct is water vapour, zero carbon emissions. The industrial sector makes up more than 20% of global emissions and includes some of the hardest parts of our economy to decarbonise. FFI will help decarbonise industry through our global portfolio of green hydrogen and green ammonia production projects, with a target to produce 15 million tonnes per year of renewable green hydrogen by 2030. And we've started doing this in our own backyard. We're a big carbon emitter and we're doing something about it. Where I work, trucks are 7 metres high, weigh 400 tonnes, but they are powered by diesel. So now, Fortescue has built the world's first hydrogen mining truck. Prototype machines will be developed and deployed to Fortescue sites with plans to commence site testing later this year. And we'll be converting hundreds of trucks to run on green energy by 2030. Our trains are 3 kilometres long. We have the fastest heavy haul railway in the world, but it's powered by diesel. So we're converting a train to run on green ammonia. We've already achieved 80% ammonia in the fuel blend. Our 330 metre long ships burn the dirtiest fuel on the planet, marine fuel, but we'll be converting them to run on green ammonia. As a start, we are converting a smaller vessel to run on ammonia this year. So we've got much more work to do, but we've established that mining trucks can run on green hydrogen, that our trains and ships will run on green ammonia. And as a large, heavy emitting company, we will turn ourselves fully green within this decade. We are committed to becoming the world's leading renewable energy and green products company and to producing zero carbon green hydrogen from 100% renewable sources. Not only are we doing this to help one of the world's largest mining companies reach net zero by 2030, we want to create an entire new green industry in Australia, creating thousands of new jobs in our regions. We know that green energy is not only the future of our planet, but also the future of our business. As well as planning renewable energy production hubs across Australia, FFI has started construction of the Green Energy Manufacturing Centre in Gladstone, Queensland. This will be a world-leading hub for manufacturing electrolysers, which are vital to the production of green hydrogen. We expect this will be the first of many manufacturing facilities that will support the emerging green hydrogen industry here in Australia. Many people now foresee the market for green hydrogen is going to boom in the next decade. For Fortescue itself, the number of shareholders has increased significantly since FFI was announced. Just in the past 12 months, the number of shareholders has more than doubled. Goldman Sachs research predicts that green hydrogen has the potential to give rise to a US $11 trillion addressable market globally for the utilities industry alone and supply up to 25% of the world's energy needs by 2050. Larry Fink, CEO and chairman of BlackRock, has warned the CEOs of global companies that there will be a significant reallocation of capital and a fundamental reshaping of finance as investors awaken to the climate crisis. And Citi report that asset managers representing half of all global investable funds, that's $88 trillion, are committed to net zero by 2050. The tide has turned and the world has realised our future isn't the fossil fuel industry. A green industrial revolution has started. So what about agriculture? Last year we announced plans to convert one of Australia's largest fossil fuel ammonia factories near Brisbane to run on green hydrogen. It produces exactly the same molecules, but there's no carbon, and much worse, no methane in its production. This will be a breakthrough, creating Australia's first green fertilisers and bringing down future costs for farmers. We know that farmers are facing rising costs of production already. We've seen insurers are increasing premiums on regional Australians due to severe weather events. Farmers, and I should also say miners, are fearing the range of carbon tariffs that are coming. This is on top of a decrease in farm profits experienced by many in the last 2 decades. But this also presents an economic opportunity. Renewable energy developments will provide the power to produce vast amounts of renewable electricity, green hydrogen and green ammonia. This can provide cheap renewable power to regional and rural properties and fleets of future green-powered agricultural equipment. And farmers, many are adopting their own net zero targets, noting the headwinds they are facing, should be incentivised by governments to adopt cleaner and greener power and fuel technologies. FFI strongly believes that this demand-driven approach and incentivising farmers to decarbonise will create conditions in the regions to take advantage of sustainable and innovative solutions to keep costs of power and fuel low. You heard about our technological advances with our mobile fleets being powered by green energy, green hydrogen and green ammonia. This same technology can be applied to farming equipment. We've recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding with JCB, a major UK construction company, to power future construction equipment with green hydrogen. Australia's regions contain all that is needed to create a major investment in their backyard. Vast renewable energy resources, such as wind and solar, are based in the regions, not in the cities. And we recognise collaboration with local communities, landowners and farmers is key. We know that they can coexist. Green hydrogen is a practical and implementable solution that will revolutionise the way we power our planet, decarbonise heavy industry and create jobs globally. Australian agriculture can take advantage of this new, large-scale green energy innovation to realise sustainable production, new jobs and investment for farmers and their communities into the future. We need to stop talking about it. It's the green future our kids are waiting for us to take. Practical, implementable, we need to start now.
Thank you, Ms. Shuttleworth, and such an optimistic note as the IPCC issues such dire warnings. I think you'll agree. So now to Dr. Jared Greenville. He's the Executive Director of ABARES, where he leads the Agricultural Forecasting and Trade Branch. He's also held senior roles at the OECD, where he managed work related to agri-food trade policy, global value chains in agriculture, and food security and risk. So, Dr. Greenville will give us the outlook for agriculture.
Hello everyone, welcome to Outlook 2022, our second national online conference. Being online provides an opportunity to reach a broader audience than our usual in-person events. So if this is your first time at one of our conferences, welcome, and also check out our website to see the range of economic and scientific analysis that we provide to industry and government to improve decision making. The last 2 years have been pretty remarkable for Australian agriculture. Notwithstanding mouse plagues, bushfires and floods in parts of the country, the sector has really gone from strength to strength after 3 consecutive years of drought. Since those drought years, where production fell year on year, production and sector value has taken 2 significant steps forward. Last year, we saw the gross value of agriculture production reach $68 billion, a record for the sector. This year, we're expecting the sector to add more than $10 billion to that, reaching around $80 billion in gross value of production, another record. These record production levels are flowing through to farm cash incomes and helping restore farm cash balance sheets. Average broadacre farm cash incomes have increased by around 34% to about $278,000 this year. This picture is fairly consistent across all farm types, from cropping, livestock and dairy operations. Incomes for cropping farms have increased by about 40%, for livestock 24%, and for dairy by 35%. Not all areas of the country have fared equally though, with incomes in areas of Western New South Wales and South East Queensland well below averages. These falls are largely related to lower wool cash receipts than we've seen from highs in previous years. With around 70% of Australia's production exported, the high production levels of the last 2 years have started to flow through to increased trade volumes. Last year, a significant share of our grain production was used to restore domestic stocks that were run down during the drought years. This year, our exports are expected to exceed more than $60 billion. That's another record for the sector. We're seeing big increases in canola and grains exports. Overall, despite supply chain disruptions, market access issues and high freight rates, export volumes have continued to flow from the country, placing Australia as a reliable international supplier. So what has been driving these numbers? We are seeing at the moment two pretty remarkable events come together. The first of these relates to production. On the cropping side, improved seasonal conditions have unleashed years of underlying productivity growth, giving us record production levels. This has seen the winter crop reach a record of over 61 million tonnes this year. For livestock, we're starting to see the dividends of herd and flock rebuilding, with supplies starting to increase. The responsiveness of our cropping sector to improve seasonal conditions has shown us what past investments in R&D and the opening up of international bilateral markets can provide in terms of tangible benefits, not to mention the hard work of Australian farmers. The second remarkable event relates to prices. The price received for Australia's bundle of export goods, or bundle of production goods, has reached 30-year highs. When we last had those prices, past production was hamstrung by a more interventionist approach to agricultural policy. A lot of hard work has occurred since the 1990s to put us into a position to take advantage of these high international prices that we're seeing now. This is helping the sector continue to contribute to both rural and regional incomes during the COVID-19 pandemic. But the coming together of high prices and good seasonal conditions is unlikely to last long. Next year is likely to be also a pretty good year, with the current seasonal outlook and the expectations that high prices will continue. We're forecasting that agricultural gross value of production will reach around $75 billion. Over the medium term, key risks relate to the path of economic growth and the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, the extent of future disruptions to supply chains, and what is going to happen to fertiliser and other input, particularly energy prices. There's also the risk of seasonal conditions. Given these risks, and as conditions return to a more normal sequence and prices fall from current highs, we're expecting the gross value of agricultural production to remain steady at around $75 to $78 billion out to 26-27. While in the out years, there will be pressures once again on the sector, particularly around farm performance, we cannot lose sight around the longer-term opportunities for Australian agricultural production. The opportunity is there for a sector that's on the front foot and leans into some of the expectations that are growing around sustainability. We're seeing a shift in the willingness to pay for sustainability by both governments and consumers globally. There's an increasing recognition that farming and land management also involves land and biodiversity stewardship, with new markets being created to establish these attributes as agricultural outputs in their own right. These trends are being extended to carbon markets, offering producers new opportunities to diversify farm incomes. We're expecting that there will be a threefold increase in the number of consumers in high-income countries between now and 2050. That's around 3 billion extra high-income consumers who will demand products that we produce and have rising expectations around sustainability. Take Indonesia, for example. Both demand for products we produce and their expected import demand are expected to increase significantly between now and 2050. This type of growth represents a real opportunity for Australian agriculture. The past 2 years presents a pretty good starting point for the sector as it looks to the future and looks towards these challenges. We know that challenging seasons will return. There will be future disruptions to international supply chains, issues with market access, labour constraints, and a range of other factors that the sector is going to have to deal with. In navigating this future, it's going to be important to make investments and invest in things that make us resilient. There's going to be a growing need to continue with opening up markets, both bilaterally and multilaterally, to provide flexibility and options when disruptions do occur and to take advantage of shifts in consumer demands. What we've seen is that past wins on preferences and market access are being eroded over time as competitors catch up, particularly in our key Asian markets. For example, wheat into Vietnam. Now both the EU and Canada have similar zero tariff access for their products by 2023, and for beef into Japan, where our preferential tariffs are also enjoyed by Canada and the US. To remain on the front foot, we're going to have to continue addressing non-tariff measures, developing biosecurity protocols that give our products actually access to these markets, and also help break down further global levels of distorting trade and production support. Market access should also have an eye on imports, ensuring that we have options on that front as well. We need to be able to import to export competitively, and it's going to be important to avoid short-sighted responses that seek to protect domestic industries from international competition. Such policies have held the sector back in the past. There's also going to be a need to continue to push for productivity growth in the face of a changing climate. We've seen past success on this front. Our climate-adjusted total factor productivity estimates show an increase in broadacre productivity since 1989 of around 28%, with much larger gains occurring in the cropping sector of around 64%. These gains in productivity have helped to offset the negative impacts of a changing climate. And we've seen actual industry productivity levels remain stable to rising. But we need to keep going, and further R&D is going to be critical here. There's also a pressing need to be competitive on the sustainability axis. This is going to be a new area of focus and will likely become a key feature of international trading markets. At the moment, Australia trades on a clean and green image, but expectations are increasing and we are one of multiple potential suppliers who can deliver on this. We need to be able to meet these expectations on a competitive footing, and we know more work needs to be done. For example, Australia's emissions intensity in beef and wheat, our two biggest export items, sit around middle of the pack. This puts us in a good starting position, but the race is only at the beginning, and it remains unclear what the rules are going to be around emissions intensity. R&D is going to be important here. Lastly, as a cross-cutting theme, we also have to develop and invest in systems that help capture the increased amount of data that's being generated by the sector in order to get the most value out of the products we produce and to also efficiently and effectively manage our biosecurity system and our biosecurity risks. Utilising data across the supply chain and making it coherent will be critical in demonstrating provenance and also other attributes that will be verified on international markets and by consumers in international markets. At the moment, this is being done in parts, but the biggest potential exists for all players when this is brought together. At the moment, no one really owns that space. Overall though, the benefits are there for an industry that can respond to these challenges. Thank you, and I hope you have an interesting and engaging conference.
Jared, thank you. And we will now have 25 minutes for your questions, so do get them onto the screen and they will be loaded up for us so that we can answer them. It is heartening to hear how much farm incomes grew last year. 40% higher for croppers, 24% higher for livestock producers, 35% higher for dairy farms. It all really does bode well for a coming year of higher fertiliser and fuel prices. I think you'll agree. And a time and an opportunity to invest in green and sustainable energy, but also production. So let's go to our panel and welcoming back Julie Shuttleworth and Jared Greenville. And as your questions come in, Let me kick off by asking Julie Shuttleworth to expand on why going green is the smart economic thing to do.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. One of the key concerns that we all have is the rising cost of fossil fuels. We're relying on imports. We're relying on countries. Some of those countries right now that provide fossil fuels are at war, and that just puts a huge risk to all of us who are consuming fossil fuels. Here in Australia, we've got vast expanses of wind and solar resources that we can develop and be in charge of our own energy security without relying on imports. And the cost of these renewables is going right down, and the cost of renewable electricity, green hydrogen and green ammonia is coming right down and will be competitive with fossil fuels. We are concerned about rising cost of tariffs, carbon taxes, potential reduction of subsidies and removal of rebates, and the cost of offsets. So it makes complete sense to go green and renewable, be in charge of our own destiny here in Australia, and make a huge renewable green hydrogen industry that supports the Australian economy rather than rely on imports.
Yeah, and so I suppose to further expand on that, a question from the floor, Julie, what role can green hydrogen play in Australia's agriculture industry, and what lessons can the agriculture sector learn from Fortescue's decarbonisation journey so far?
There's three key areas where I see green hydrogen and renewable energy for the agriculture sector. The first, obviously, is fertilisers and making green ammonia to feed into fertilisers. So to make green ammonia, firstly, you need to make green hydrogen. And we're aiming to do this at Intertech Pivot's plant near Brisbane and make completely green fertilisers with zero fossil fuels, taking renewable electricity, making green hydrogen from electrolysis, then making green ammonia to make green fertilisers. So fertilisers is one. The second is farm equipment, agricultural equipment, very similar to what Fortescue is doing, converting our fleet of equipment into use battery electric from renewable electricity, using green hydrogen and green ammonia, depending on the type of piece of equipment it is or the engine it is. So there's three different options there. The same technology can be applied to farming equipment. And then, of course, renewable energy, wind and solar, straight into stationary power. So three key areas that we see for agriculture. One, fertilisers can be made green. Second is farming equipment can go green using a combination of green fuels, and then, of course, the stationary power.
Well, I think it's very interesting because we can pick up on Jared Greenville's point there that we're about a middle of the pack in terms of emission intensity for beef and grain production. And we know that the EU is planning to introduce sort of carbon tariffs, if you like. They call them something else. But Jared, why is it important then to not only deliver on sustainability expectations, but also be competitive in doing so?
I think the key reason for that is because Australia is one of multiple suppliers. We operate in a globally competitive environment. You know, when we did some work looking at why Chinese consumers were buying Australian products, they viewed us alongside a number of other suppliers as ones who could deliver clean and green products. Now, if we're going to go forward, and we know that there's work to do, as you say, that we're around middle of the pack in some of these things, it's not only about meeting the standard, but it's about doing it at a low-cost way. And as governments pull out of these other measures that Julie was talking about, and we've got rising input prices and things like that, we need to find ways to I guess, get that double dividend in a way. So you've got productivity growth and you're reducing your emissions at the same time. And that's where investments into R&D and activities like businesses that Julie's doing really play a massive role, because they can deliver on both those things. We could get lower cost and lower emissions profile into our fertilisers. We could get lower cost and lower emissions profiles into our ag machinery, and then hopefully on the production side with our animals and feed supplements and all those other things can have this kind of double dividend. So I think that's the key reason, because if we don't do it efficiently or competitively, someone else will.
Well, I know as a person who's keenly watching the green car market, I want an electric car. And likewise, my family wants, electric bikes. I mean, it seems such a long way away. Julie Shuttleworth, maybe if you can pick up your plan to produce green hydrogen, the potential is for, hydrogen tractors and those sorts of things. I mean, how soon can we see any of these things in Australia?
Well, we last year, Fortescue Future Industries developed the world's first green hydrogen mining truck. And we had to do it ourselves because we are finding that the original equipment manufacturers are much slower than we need to be to meet our net zero targets by 2030. So we are developing this technology in-house ourselves. And this year we'll have one of those trucks operating in our mining environment, as well as locomotives running on battery electric and running on ammonia. And we're converting a ship to run on ammonia. So we've taken this into our own hands to lead by example, to do it ourselves. In terms of original equipment manufacturers, I actually think they'll quickly get up the curve. Now they can see that it's actually happening and there's a strong demand from the world to drive forward much quicker than they were previously expecting. So I hope to see this soon rolled out into the agricultural sector as well. Meanwhile, we're taking our learnings and we're hoping to share those with the world because we need the whole world to decarbonise. The planet is absolutely cooking. Getting worse every month.
So Jared, with ABARES forecast over the medium term to 26-27, what factors will be most influential to sector performance?
So I think there's a couple of factors that are going to really play out over the medium term in terms of where we go and how big the sector is, how much its value of production is. The key one is obviously the economic environment in which we operate. So we've got global recovery from COVID. We've got this current mix of disruption, war and so forth that are happening in Russia and the Ukraine. And then we've also got seasonal conditions that will happen on top of that domestically here in Australia. Those first two are really going to drive our cost of inputs, and we've talked about fertiliser and fuel costs and the uncertainty as to how that goes. They'll also influence output prices. And so at the moment, we've got a situation where output prices are rising and input prices are rising, but as we were talking about earlier, farm cash incomes are going up. So at the moment, output prices has been the dominant factor. As we look forward, it's uncertainty as to whether that will keep going, and that will start to squeeze, our margins that we get across the sector. The other thing that's going to happen quite likely over the medium term for Australian agriculture is that we'll get a poor season. And so now really is the time to use those improved conditions, 32-year high prices, great production, to think about, well, how do we set ourselves up to be a bit more resilient the next time that happens? Because we know we operate in one of the most variable climates in the world that it will happen. And so how do we weather that storm a little bit better than perhaps we've seen in the past? Or what lessons can we draw from those? And where do we invest, the gains that we've had over the last 2 years? It's been a respite, and then we've had another good year. And so it's going to be important where we put that to drive where we go next.
And Jared, so how will Australian exports navigate the ongoing uncertainty around trade issues?
So we've been pretty, resilient across, and Mathias Cormann mentioned this in his talk, that agri markets have been incredibly resilient. We're throwing one of the biggest stress tests at them that you could ever conceive with the COVID pandemic and everything else that's going on. And Australian exports have still left our shores and made it to markets. And I think part of the key reasons for that is that we've had options, in particular on the trade front. We've got market access to a whole range of different countries, and that's allowed us to pivot when we've had disruptions in China or elsewhere to other markets. So it's going to be critical. The other things that are going to be really important for our trade environment is what happens in that international space on ag subsidies, and the WTO is talking about next steps and how do we lessen the interventions in ag markets. And we know that all those interventions, they don't really help. They don't help produce more food globally. They don't help lower prices, and they certainly don't help production get to its most efficient area. So for us to better navigate that, there's that focus on our own relationships bilaterally and regionally, but also multilaterally. And as I mentioned, the other aspect is going to be make sure that we can access inputs. And we have a focus often on exports, and we think exports are good, but imports are just as good. And they're critical. We need to import to export. So that's going to be the other focus that we need to have a look at.
So a question, I suppose, to Julie that's come from our audience, and your optimistic message seems a bit at odds, according to our questioner, with our political leaders' push for the status quo. Are our leaders supporting what we've heard from the OECD, from FFI, from you, and from ABARES this morning?
It's really important that governments, communities and companies work together to drive this opportunity we have for the green hydrogen economy. We are finding across Australia, some states are very supportive and proactive. You'll see our announcements in Queensland, where we've just started construction on a 2 gigawatt electrolyser manufacturing facility. Where we can move quickly is where we've got fast, efficient approvals pathways, government support, community support. And it was great to see our Prime Minister attend COP26 and present a strong message there. We really need to keep working together with the government, communities and the companies to drive this forward. Fortescue Future Industries leading by example, and hopefully with that, we can show that it can be done and give people the confidence it can be done.
So, Jared, perhaps this one's for you, but what effect may the recent events in Ukraine, or the current events in Ukraine, have on ABARES forecasts? And what about the Queensland and New South Wales floods, Jared?
It's a pretty tragic situation that's unfolding in the Ukraine, and so I guess first the thoughts go out to the people who are affected by that conflict. And I guess if focusing on grain markets, we know that the Black Sea region is a significant contributor to barley and wheat exports. Ukraine and Russia contribute on average about 30% in wheat and about 20% in barley. What happens from here really depends on both the supply coming back in particularly North America and how their seasonal conditions play out. At the moment, prices have gone up about 30% since last year for wheat, largely because of these seasonal conditions. And we can't forget that Russia's already been restricting its supply of wheat exports to world markets. So the market price that we see today is conditional on a lower supply out of Russia anyway. The other things that will play out, obviously, are what happens with any trade that Russia and Ukraine manage to get out. If that plays out and that goes to other markets, then we'll see a bit of a reorganisation. But it'd be hard to believe that it won't at least maintain higher prices for longer, or at least put some upward pressure on those international prices. Coming to the second part about the floods in New South Wales and Queensland, I think really it's a bit early to tell at this point in time. These things are happening rapidly, but you can see certainly some short-term disruptions to the supply of fruit and vegetables. And I think I was reading this morning some news reports of supply disruptions of fresh fruit and vegetables coming out of Queensland. That will certainly have an impact in the short term. Floods luckily do subside. Australia is a massive country. And so the longer run prospects for most of our sectors in terms of production and that coming onto the domestic market are pretty good, particularly horticulture. We've got high water storages if we think beyond the immediate. Hopefully with the opening up of international borders and all the other measures that have gone into to improve labour supply, we'll get a lower pressure on the labour costs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the conference. And that should moderate some of those impacts as we go out. But the immediate, it's a bit of a wait and see.
I'll put this question to both of you, pipe up which one wants to answer. You spoke about the agriculture being a consumer of hydrogen. Does it have a role in production, such as solar panels over water storages to help evaporation and produce hydrogen through electrolysis? And do agricultural producers have enough scale? Julie.
This is a great opportunity for pastoralists, farmers, landowners to actually partake in the renewable energy economy, where there's an opportunity to multi-use land, particularly large station areas where there's cattle or sheep. With wind farms, they can coexist. And this is an opportunity for farmers to even look at getting a second income through leasing or getting some sort of charging some sort of fee for having wind turbines on their land. And we're looking at these opportunities here in Western Australia. We've had very successful meetings with pastoralists where they're very interested in doing this. And this renewable energy, wind farms in particular, can feed into decarbonising other industrial areas in the state. So there's plenty of opportunity there to partake not only in your own decarbonisation, but helping other areas decarbonise as well using your land. Of course, considering that this needs to all be done in consultation with the landowner, and make sure that you can still get the good use from the land. That makes it most economic for everybody.
Maybe a follow-up question for you, Julie, but our questioner has said they've read reports that indicate hydrogen power is more expensive to package for use in vehicles than battery power. So is this your view, and why hydrogen over battery power?
There's three key areas where we can decarbonise hard-to-abate sectors, including vehicles. One, renewable electricity can go straight into battery electric vehicles. For small vehicles, that makes complete sense, where you can charge the vehicle off a renewable energy grid. Where you can't do that, or for harder to abate areas such as long distance haulage, heavy haulage, shipping, trains, then green ammonia and green hydrogen can be used. So it is a combination of renewable electricity to charge into battery electric, or green hydrogen or green ammonia, depending on the application, is going to be a combination of all of those three. For smaller vehicles, where it makes sense, we can charge off a grid, battery electric small vehicles make sense. In other areas where you can't do that, then hydrogen fuel cells or green ammonia for other vehicles makes sense.
Now, I'm aware we've just hit 11 o'clock, but we can go over because there's a couple more questions that are quite good. Now, one person wants to know what is done to improve the social license of energy from wastes. Can you answer that? Social license, energy from wastes. So I'm not sure whether this is waste from forestry production or whether waste from municipalities.
Can you ask the question again? Sorry,
well,
it's not clear.
Yes, it isn't exactly clear to me, but I will ask it again and maybe see if we can get it. But what is being done to improve the social license of producing energy from waste? Is that something?
Maybe this refers to using waste from our households and industry to use that to make energy. I'm assuming that's what that means. This is not an area that Fortescue is focused on because it still involves fossil fuels and releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we're just focused on renewable electricity and green hydrogen, green ammonia that has zero carbon dioxide emissions. And also this process can be done at small scale and should be encouraged for small scale, potentially shires and small towns and regions, but it's not something that at industrial scale that we're looking at seriously.
Right, and ARENA funding for any of those projects is the moot point there. Maybe this last question for Jared. How can we empower more stakeholders to get involved in the biosecurity system, improving biosecurity behaviours?
I mean, it's a great question because it's something that's definitely needed, and we released a report just the other day about general surveillance programs, and it's a bit of a how-to guide, and it just highlighted the complexity and the need, I guess, for focus that is required to get those things up and running. I think the shared understanding is the biggest issue here, that try and make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what the risks are and the benefits are from being part of this system. It underpins our ability to produce, and so it might be an inconvenience or it might be an added task, but it really is important for everything that we do and our international reputation and the like. So I think that's one of the most fundamental aspects. The other obviously relates to clear focus for what we want to achieve with a biosecurity system and with our programs. So people have an understanding. If you want to be involved, how can you be involved, and what does that actually look like? And then have a well-resourced and focused group that helps deliver on that.
I think one thing we're noticing is that banks may be drawing up criteria for sustainability. Can you just perhaps cover off on that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, maybe I'll make a couple of observations, but I know Julie mentioned this in her talk about the importance of financing and how financing is going to be an important aspect of where we go in the future. And so we know that financing underpins, there's equity and there's debt. And we rely on our financial institutions to provide a lot of debt funding that goes into improving, making investments and the like. Increasingly, they're asking producers and everywhere in the economy, well, You know, what's your plan? How are you delivering on sustainability? How are you delivering on your climate risks? How are you delivering on expectations about reducing your emissions profile and the like? So it's not only, I guess it becomes a matter of access to that finance and also the cost of that finance. And so I think it's going to be a really important driving force as to where the sector goes and where you can get some of that finance to make some of the investments we're talking about to make yourself resilient.
And as a big company, Julie, how would you cover off on that?
Well, there is plenty of opportunity for what we call green finance or green funding. There's a lot of commitments now from those companies that provide finance to commit to net zero by at least 2050, in some cases earlier. Trillions of dollars available for this funding coming up. So we're very confident that funding for these projects will be available.
Well, I'd like to thank both of our speakers, Julie Shuttleworth from Fortescue Futures and Jared Greenville from ABARES, and Mathias Cormann and earlier David Littleproud. And I'll invite you to do the short survey, which is going to pop up on your screen shortly. And don't forget the spotlight exhibitors, and they'll be on for the next half hour. So from me, thanks very much.